Hi, Mr. McNaughton. Great pleasure to welcome you back to the show. Thanks for making the time.
No problem.
Do you foresee any scenario in which anyone other than Donald Trump is the Republican nominee at this point?
No, I don't think so. I mean, obviously, this is the first week of March and the election's not till November. So, who knows what happens in 5 or 6 months in terms of, when you're dealing with a 77-year-old, you never know. But I mean, the reality is in terms of nomination, he will be the nominee, and it'll be pretty clear after tonight, I think.
What, in your view, is the primary implication for Canada of that?
Well, I think there's sort of two things. I mean, one of them is obviously Trump 2.0 is going to be even more challenging to deal with than the initial Trump because he, in the first instance, he didn't know what to expect. He initially surrounded himself with some very good people who I think moderated some of his more extreme ambitions, shall we say. And I think this time, he will surround himself with, if he wins, he'll surround himself with people that um, will do what he wants them to do, and he will know that he's only got one term, unless the Constitution changes, and therefore he will want to get as much done as possible. And given the protectionist sentiments that he's already talked about, we're going to have our hands full. That's for sure.
How worried would you be at this point if you were still ambassador?
Well, I'd be worried about two things. One of them is obviously I'd be worried about, a second term of Donald Trump, but I'd also be worried just generally about the mood in America and the state of American politics. This isn't all about Donald Trump. This is also about, the ebbs and flows of protectionism and isolationism in the United States, which we've seen, over history. And I would say right now we're into a fairly extreme, isolationism and protectionism mode on both sides of the aisle. And just some really, really difficult politics. So, I thought I had my hands full in 2016. Whoever the ambassador is, if it's Kirsten on a going forward basis or whoever it is going to have their hands even more full because it's going to be a challenging time for sure.
Do you think,
For
though,
Canada and for the rest of the world.
for sure, do you think it is a mistake for us here in Canada, though, to attribute or ascribe all of the sentiment or the mood that you described to the absence or presence of Donald Trump?
No, that is a mistake. I mean, I think what Donald Trump has sort of cleverly done, he did it in 2016 and he's doing it again now, and that is to tap into and I think amplify, but I think he's tapped into sort of a mood in the United States, and part of it is this, anti-Washington, the swamp, the whatever. Um, but that mood exists in America, regardless of who ends up being the president.
So what does, for example, Team Canada Round 2 draw from that? Does it necessitate taking seriously a lot of the concerns that maybe are described in an inflammatory way by Trump and his supporters, but that resonate with a larger segment of Americans or other politicians?
Well, sure. I mean, we have to understand that, um, you know, we need to reach out to our best friend, our closest ally, and show them that we are a dependable partner. We're a dependable partner on a whole host of things that we share together, whether that be, fighting, wildfires, or whether that be, NORAD and making sure that the Russians and others are kept in check, and We have to be sensitive to the things that they worry about drugs coming into the illegal drugs coming into the country. I mean, there are a whole host of things where I think we are good partners. I just think we need to emphasize that more. And I think um, this isn't just about trade. We always like to go down and say, oh, this is an integrated North American economy. You depend on us, we depend on you. The reality is, in trade terms, we are way more dependent on the United States than they are on us. And so we have to emphasize not just those things that are important to us, but also be really sensitive to the things that are concerning the vast majority of Americans right now, which are the things I mentioned.
When you talk about emphasizing, do you mean talking more about or doing more about? And specifically, I wanted to zero in, you mentioned NORAD, but more widely the issue of spending on defense, because it has been talked about quite publicly, pardon me, by a number of officials associated more largely with NATO recently, but even more specifically with the United States.
Yeah, well, this is a personal view. I am not big on, uh, you know, talking about targets. We have targets for foreign aid, we have targets for climate change, we have targets for all sorts of things, and we never seem to meet them, or they're set so far out that they're virtually meaningless because they're a couple of terms past whoever's in power. What I like is plans, concrete plans, actions, things that show that you're doing things. So whether we spend 1.4 or 1.6 or 1.8 or 2.2 or whatever it is, yeah, maybe that's something you can talk about once you've got there. But in the meantime, the things that really make a difference are, what are the concrete things that you're going to do that are going to make a difference today, tomorrow, next year, in terms of providing more security to this continent.
And I do certainly take your point around, attaching more specifics, like was the ask of the U.S. where NORAD was concerned. And I do take your point around sort of the abstract nature of a target if you never meet it. But they have been very specific recently, just given world events and particularly what Russia is doing to Ukraine, that to them, to our allies and to the U.S. specifically, that number means something now. Do you think it's still okay for us, as we embark on this Team Canada journey, to dismiss that?
I'm not dismissing it. I just worry that, that becomes the be all and the end all. It is,
Right.
Well, why don't we commit to 2%, and why don't we commit to be at 2% by 2035 or 2030 or whatever? No, and we're not going to get there next year. Let's think about some real tangible improvements to our defense capabilities that we really need to do in any case. I think we have, over the years, not just this administration, but the prior one and others, we have not done what we need to do to step up on defense, and I think we need to do it. And that is, how can we be most helpful? Is it in Ukraine? Is it in NORAD? Is it, in terms of, some things related to China? Where is it that we can actually make a difference and be most helpful? That's what you do when you're partners. And, as I say, yeah, the 2% goal the Americans talk about, but the reality is, if you talk to people in the defense, the actual people in the armed forces, the generals, the chief, their chief, our equivalent of the chief of defense staff, they will tell you, okay, here are some of the things that would be really helpful, and they're not setting targets; they're actually doing things. So that's what I do.
Okay, Mr. McNaughton, I'll leave it on that note. I appreciate your time and your analysis as always. Thank you.